In League of Legends, Jericho Swain is a battle mage that wields demonic powers to suck out the life force and souls of his enemies. In the lore, Jericho is still all of that, but he is also the Grand General of Noxus, and he currently rules this massive empire as one of 3, and is perhaps the most dedicated leader that Noxus has ever had in its entire history. So let's take a look at Swain. Swain was born to the Patrician family, a long-running noble house in Noxus. And as a young member of this house, a young noble, Swain found himself at a crossroads. The Patrician family, his family, had become involved in a secret plot to overthrow the Emperor of Noxus, Borum Darkwill. Several other noble houses were involved in this plot, and they identified their co-conspirators through the symbol of a black rose. This cabal was led by a mysterious pale lady who had told the group of conspirators of a power at the very centre of the empire, one that, in the right hands, could topple an emperor. But rather than join the cabal in pursuit of greater power for him and his family, Swain instead simply exposed the plot. And he himself would go on to execute many of the most prominent traitors in that group, including his own mother and father, as well as their leader, the mysterious pale woman. Now, this is really, really important to understanding just how dedicated Swain is to the Noxian Empire and just how ruthless he can be when it comes to those who he feels would do that empire harm. There is nothing he won't sacrifice for the empire, including his own family. For this act of service, Swain was rewarded with a place in the Noxian military where he could best serve the Empire by expanding its borders. Swain viewed this as a huge honour, and his time in the military would directly shape his view on how the world should operate. Specifically, the Noxian military cared very little about a person's background, and if you had the skill and the talents, then you would be rewarded. And yes, of course, nobles had the advantage of education, social connections, and all of that, but fundamentally, they were starting at the same place, and everyone had a chance to prove themselves. The whole system was designed so that the best would rise to the top, irregardless of where you came from. This was very different from Swain's noble background back in the capital city, where you were born with power, money, and status. People were granted positions of influence because of the name of their house or who their parents were, rather than on their own merits. Swain much preferred the idea of earning your position in society through pure ability and hard work, and not because you happen to be born to a particular house. Many years would pass by, and Swain would quickly climb the ranks of the military, proving himself to be an effective leader on the battlefield by claiming large parts of Shurima for the Noxian Empire. And it was during these long years on the battlefield that Swain began to first doubt Emperor Darkwill's motivations. Noxus, on paper, believes in making the lives of those they conquer better by integrating them into the Empire and giving them a purpose as part of something bigger and better than what they could achieve alone, and the entirety of Noxian history is built on those guiding principles. In theory, everybody benefits. However, under Borum Darkwill, that was increasingly becoming not the case. Those they conquered were not being integrated or empowered, and instead they were being exploited, with the Empire looting their valuables and leaving them, in many cases, far worse off than they were before. Swain disagreed with this approach, believing that simply taking people's stuff against their will was probably an ineffective way to expand the Empire long term, but as a loyal soldier, he carried on regardless. Just to fast forward a little bit, this is why in the modern day, Noxus is suffering from so many rebellions, because everyone they conquered during Borum Darkwill's rule did not enjoy it. And they basically don't want to be under Noxus anymore because it's just been a really terrible experience for them. Eventually, Borum Darkwill would order a full-scale invasion of Ionia, and Swain was sent across the ocean alongside the full might of the Noxian army. The initial attack on Ionia went extraordinarily well for Noxus. Ionia had no standing army, no central government to organise an army, and no one leader for the nation to rally behind. The closest thing the Ionians have are the monasteries, but there are hundreds of these dotted around the entirety of Ionia, and they're all independent from one another. There were parts of Ionia that didn't even know they were under attack, because as a nation, they just had no communication network. So it isn't really fair to say that this was a war between Noxus and Ionia. It was more like a war of Noxus versus a bunch of smaller, almost independent countries that didn't work together at all. Naturally, Swain did very well and conquered a bunch of Ionia for Noxus in a very short amount of time, and would eventually find himself to something called the Placidium of Navori. This place is a very special symbol to the people of Ionia, and I won't go into why that is in this video. Just know that a lot of Ionians revere this place as something special. Now, the war was going so well that Noxus really should have won in a matter of months or even possibly weeks, but Darkwill, instead of focusing on winning the war, ended up ordering his men to scour the land for magical artifacts. Specifically, he was looking for anything rumoured to extend a mortal's lifespan. This left many Noxian generals, like Swain, short on soldiers, as much of the army's focus was on looting instead of fighting and conquering. Now, this wasn't much of a problem at first, but as the years rolled on, the Ionians began to find their feet a little bit, and they started to organise into larger militias, which are basically just farmers with swords, but they had seen their fair share of conflict by this point, and in many cases had also gone through some form of training by the monasteries that were still standing. These farmers had become proper soldiers. But Borum Darkwill hadn't changed his strategy. He continued to prioritise looting over conquest, giving space to these now experienced militias and soldiers to grow and practice the art of warfare, and they got very good at it. And it was one of these militias that had been roaming around Ionia that eventually launched an attack on Swain at the Placidium of Navori. Swain and his warband had requested reinforcements and supplies, but they never came. They simply didn't have what they needed to properly defend the Placidium, and while Swain made some objectively genius tactical decisions to get the upper hand, they simply did not have the men to win the fight. Swain took to the battlefield himself, which helped, but he was eventually struck down by an incredibly skilled warrior fighting in ways that he'd never seen before, that no living Noxian had ever seen before. And this young warrior shattered one of his knees and severed his arm from his body. She lifted his now detached arm into the air for everyone to see, and this very public act of defiance and victory against Noxus at their most important cultural site would bring the Ionians together into a singular resistance. And this young warrior, a 14-year-old girl named Aurelia, would become their leader. Now, as Swain lay on the floor waiting to die from blood loss, a three-eyed raven appeared in front of him, and it reeked of the same dark powers that Swain's parents were looking for in the heart of Noxus all those years ago. This raven granted him a vision of a black rose, a pale woman, and a puppet emperor. In this moment, Swain knew that the Cabal he thought that he'd vanquished as a young man was still at large, and the Emperor was in their service. And together, they were destroying Noxus from the inside in pursuit of their own selfish desires. The Raven also granted Swain knowledge on where to find the power that... Oh, my phone went off. Blah, blah, blah. Where was I? This Raven also granted Swain knowledge of where to find the power that his parents had sought all those years ago, and the knowledge on how to use it. Swain, now believing the biggest enemies to his beloved empire to be Borum Darkwill and the mysterious Pale Lady that controlled him, somehow, and we don't know how, but somehow managed to stumble away from the battle to safety and make his way back to Noxus Prime, which is the name of the city of Noxus as opposed to the Empire of Noxus. It's the capital of Noxus. Noxus Prime is the capital city of Noxus. It's a terrible name. Upon arriving home, Swain was labelled as a disgrace to the Noxian Empire. On the surface of things, he had lost a key strategic location to a group of farmers led by a 14-year-old child. We know it wasn't his fault, but Darkwill laid the blame on Swain, and he was cast out of the military as a result, destined to roam the streets of Noxus as a cripple. Swain used this freedom to journey into the heart of Noxus, which is called the Immortal Bastion, to uncover the dark power shown to him by that three-eyed raven, that same dark power that his parents were searching for many, many years ago. Now, within the Immortal Bastion, Swain discovers the Demon of Secrets, named Rorm. This demon takes on the form of that three-eyed raven, and he preys on those near death. Specifically, he likes to feed on their secrets in their final moments. Swain somehow learns to command the demon's power for himself, and he leaves the Immortal Bastion. Now, before I move on, I should say that people don't just leave the Immortal Bastion. People that go in never come out again. In addition to that, people just don't control demon power. That is not something you get to do in Runeterra. Demons are very tricksy, and everyone that tries to do it dies. Swain is highly unusual that he was able to do both of those things back to back. It makes me think there's a larger thing at play here, but hey, we're going into speculation. That's another video. Over the next few years, Swain would gather allies in the shadows and master Raum's demonic powers to the point that he was no longer crippled. He still had a bit of a limp, but he was able to walk around unassisted quite easily, and slowly would plan a coup against Emperor Borum Darkwill. Now, it took years to pull it all together, but eventually Swain would storm the throne room and crush Darkwill with a display of horrific demonic magic. And the whole coup was over in just a single night. And using the support of the allies that he'd acquired over those past few years, he announced himself as the new emperor of the Noxian Empire. But rather than do what everyone expected and proclaim himself as the sole emperor, he instead established a triumvirate who would lead Noxus equally, named the Triferix. This Council of Three was made so that no one person could rule Noxus, and if one of the three were to act out of place, then the other two would be able to keep them in check, including himself if he was to lose control over Raum, the demon that he now possessed. Shortly after establishing this Triferix, Swain would meet with the noble houses in Noxus and set out his plans for the future of the Empire. These included some radical new policies around removing inherited lordship, inherited wealth, and outlawing slavery. All good things, right? These policies would essentially dismantle the existing systems of power in Noxus and require the noble families to earn their place rather than be given power by birthright, essentially making it so that nobles were standing toe-to-toe with foreign slaves at home, just like they did on the front lines of battle in the military. These policies obviously weren't popular with the noble houses, but Swain offered to pardon any previous wrongdoings if they agreed to these new laws and pledged themselves to his vision for Noxus. And many did just that, at least on the surface. Those who did publicly dissent were given a short time to finish up their business and leave the Empire. If they didn't, then Swain simply destroyed them, usually by throwing them into the fighting pits to die, often at the hands of Draven, who was one of Swain's key allies in the coup. One organisation that was not pardoned, however, was the Black Rose. Swain proclaimed that every agent of the Black Rose was an enemy to Noxus, and that any citizen of the Empire was obligated to do them harm should they encounter one of its members. The Black Rose, which was already quite a secretive organisation, went completely underground in response. What follows here is a bit of a game of cat and mouse between Swain and the Black Rose, as they both seek to find and destroy the other. One of the demonic powers Swain gained from Raum was the ability to summon a flock of ravens who can relay information back to him from pretty much anywhere in the world. One of his abilities in League of Legends is based on this idea. He had used this power to help him overthrow Borum Darkwill, and he now uses this same power to seek and root out the Black Rose in Noxus. In response, the Black Rose have become incredibly careful with their operations, though have in some ways been bolstered by this, as many Noxians, even those in senior positions who say they follow Swain, view him as a monster to be toppled and are willing to align with the Black Rose to do this. One such example of this is the Black Powder plot. Several war hosts had been attempting and failing to bring the Rockrund Plains under the Noxian banner, so much so that Swain ventured to the front lines himself to meet with the war host generals just to find out what was going on and see if he could make some progress. One of the generals, named Granth, was under the influence of the Black Rose, specifically that mysterious pale lady that we keep hearing about, and attempted to ignite a hidden explosive to kill Swain and himself in the process. As Granth attempted to light the fuse, however, Swain's demonic hand, which is another power he got from Raum, clamped around his throat and prevented the explosion from going off, before handing over Granth to Raum to devour his soul and consume his secrets. This game of cat and mouse has gone on for several years, and while Swain still intends to destroy the Black Rose, they do seem to have fallen into somewhat of a stalemate. We see in the Runeterra card game and in Rel's backstory that the Black Rose is running institutions that train mages in anything from metal bending to blood magic. It is unclear why Swain hasn't clamped down on this, There is a developer interview that suggests that Swain has been focused on bigger or more immediate threats, but I do find that hard to believe that a school churning out insanely powerful mages hellbent on destroying you wouldn't be an immediate threat for him to deal with. We also see in the recent book that came out that the Black Rose are doing some crazy stuff all around the world. This is a threat, but I digress. Swain and the Black Rose seem to be coexisting right now. And fundamentally, that is Swain and where he is at right now. So to summarize, Swain is continuing to rule Noxus as one of the 3 Triferous Council members. He focuses most of his efforts on preserving and expanding the Empire, as he's always done, and he seems to be in an unwinnable feud with the Black Rose that just isn't ending, although he is slowly seeming to lose support from those around him, in part because of the harsh expectations I think he places on Noxian citizens, and in part because he's a soul-sucking, half-demon monster that's probably quite scary, and I don't think people like that. I could see Swain becoming a bit of a tyrant in his pursuit of creating the perfect Noxus in the future. Maybe the Black Rose will go too far and he loses his cool and he does something, and maybe Darius rebels against him and we get a civil war scenario. There are hints of that in some of the comics and short stories, which would be very cool, but we just don't know. I would love to see that play out in the upcoming Noxus TV show. I think that'd be fantastic, but there we are. So, thank you for watching. Let me know what you want Riot to do with Swain in the comments. I'm actually very interested to hear it, and there's always great theories I see in the community, so I'd love to hear that. Also, I did lose my job somewhat recently. I work in the games industry, and it's pretty rough right now, so any likes, shares, comments, it's all really helpful. Thank you very much. Goodbye.